नौजवानाने अली अकबर है, हम फिदायाने अली अकबर है।
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. عن جابر بن عبد الله الأنصاري عن فاطمة الزهراء عليها السلام بنت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله قال: سمعت فاطمة أنها قالت: دخل علي أبي رسول الله في بعض الأيام فقال: السلام عليك يا فاطمة. فقلت: عليك السلام. قال: إني أجد في بدني ضعفا. فقلت له: أعيذك بالله يا أبتاه من الضعف. فقال: يا فاطمة ائتيني بالكساء اليماني فغطيني به. فأتيته بالكساء اليماني فغطيته به وسرت أنظر إليه وإذا وجهه يتلألأ كأنه البدر في ليلة تمامه وكماله. اللهم صل على. فما كانت إلا ساعة وإذا بولد الحسن قد أقبل وقال: السلام عليك يا أمه. فقلت: عليك السلام يا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي. فقال لي: يا أمه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جدي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. وقلت: نعم إن جدك تحت الكساء. فأقبل الحسن نحو الكساء وقال: السلام عليك يا جداه يا رسول الله، أتأذن لي أن أدخل معك تحت الكساء؟ فقال: وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا صاحب حوضي، قد أذنت لك. فدخل معه تحت الكساء. فما كانت إلا ساعة وإذا بولد الحسين قد أقبل وقال: السلام عليك يا أمه. فقلت: عليك السلام يا ولدي ويا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي. فقال لي: يا أمه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جدي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. فقلت: نعم إن جدك وأخاك تحت الكساء. فدنا الحسين نحو الكساء وقال: السلام عليك يا جدا، السلام عليك يا من اختاره الله، أتأذن لي أن أكون معكما تحت الكساء؟ فقال: وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا شافع أمتي، قد أذنت لك. فدخل معهما تحت الكساء. فأقبل عند ذلك أبو الحسن علي بن أبي طالب وقال: السلام عليك يا بنت رسول الله. فقلت: عليك السلام يا أبا الحسن ويا أمير المؤمنين. فقال: يا فاطمة إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة أخي وابن عمي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. فقلت: نعم ها هو مع ولديك تحت الكساء. فأقبل علي نحو الكساء وقال: السلام عليك يا رسول الله، أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء؟ قال له: وعليك السلام يا أخي ويا وصي وخليفتي وصاحب لوائي، قد أذنت لك. فدخل علي تحت الكساء. ثم أتيت نحو الكساء وقلت: السلام عليك يا أبتاه يا رسول الله، أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء؟ قال: وعليك السلام يا بنتي ويا بدعتي، قد أذنت لك. فدخلت تحت الكساء. فلما اكتملنا جميعا تحت الكساء أخذ أبي رسول الله بطرف الكساء وأومأ بيده اليمنى إلى السماء وقال: اللهم إن هؤلاء لأهل بيتي وخاصتي وحامتي، لحمهم لحمي ودمهم دمي، يؤلمني ما يؤلمهم ويحزنني ما يحزنهم. أنا حرب لمن حاربهم وسلم لمن سالمهم وعدو لمن عاداهم ومحب لمن أحبهم. إنهم مني وأنا منهم، فاجعل صلواتك وبركاتك ورحمتك وغفرانك ورضوانك علي وعليهم، وأذهب عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل على. فقال الله عز وجل: يا ملائكتي ويا سكان سماواتي، إني ما خلقت سماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدحيا ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مذيعا ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فلكا يسري إلا في محبة هؤلاء الخمسة الذين هم تحت الكساء. فقال لأمين جبرائيل: يا رب ومن تحت الكساء؟ فقال عز وجل: هم أهل بيت النبوة ومعدن الرسالة، أم فاطمة وأبوها وبعلها وبنوها. اللهم صل على محمد. فقال جبرائيل: يا ربي أتأذن لي أن أهبط إلى الأرض لأكون معهم سادسا؟ فقال الله: نعم قد أذنت لك. فهبط الأمين جبريل وقال: السلام عليك يا رسول الله. العلي الأعلى يقرئك السلام ويخصك بالتحية والإكرام ويقول لك: وعزتي وجلالي إني ما خلقت سماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدحيا ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضيئا ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فلكا يسري إلا لأجلكم ومحبتكم، وقد أذن لي أن أدخل معكم، فهل تأذن لي يا رسول الله؟ فقال رسول الله: وعليك السلام يا أمين وحي الله، إنه نعم قد أذنت لك. فدخل جبريل معنا تحت الكساء، فقال لأبي: إن الله قد أوحى إليكم يقول: إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا. فقال علي لأبي: يا رسول الله أخبرني ما لجلوسنا هذا تحت الكساء من الفضل عند الله. فقال النبي: والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واستفاني بالرسالة نجيا، ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيعتنا ومحبينا إلا ونزلت عليهم الرحمة وهفت بهم الملائكة واستغفرت لهم إلى أن يتفرقوا. فقال علي: إذا والله فزنا وفاز شيعتنا ورب الكعبة. وقال النبي ثانيا: يا علي والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واستفاني بالرسالة نجيا، ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيعتنا ومحبينا وفيهم محموما إلا وفرج الله حما، ولا مغموم إلا وكشف الله غما، ولا طالب حاجة إلا وقضى الله حاجته. فقال علي: إذا والله فزنا وسعدنا، وكذلك شيعتنا فازوا وسعدوا في الدنيا والآخرة ورب الكعبة. اللهم
بر محمد وآل محمد صلوات. بردی کے صلوات صلی علی محمد و آل محمد. ہر سال جو ذکر شہداء کرتے ہیں، ہر سال جو ذکر شہداء کرتے ہیں، ایک فرض ہے ہم پر جو ادا کرتے ہیں، زہرا سے جو وعدہ تھا نبی کا ظاہر، اس وعدے کو ہم لوگ وفا کرتے ہیں، ہر سال جو ذکر مصحف منزل یاسین مبین ہے سجاد، مصحف منزل یاسین مبین ہے عرفان و یقین ہے سجاد، خاتم صبر و تحمل کے نگی ہیں، سجاد چار معصوموں کے سجادہ نشین ہے، خلق میں جیسے علی ہے شہر لاک کے بعد، بہو بہو ایسے ہیں یہ جتن پاک کے بعد، مصحف منزل آتا صاحب آپ جائیں گے آج تشریف لیں، یا آپ تو سالانہ ہمارے ساتھ پڑھانے نہیں ہیں. بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات. یہ میں نے اپنے کلام میں سے سلام انتخاب کیا ہے. میرا مولا کسی
کہا موسیٰ نے یہ جھولے میں ازدر چیرنے والا، بھائی محمد کی ضعیفی کا عصا معلوم ہوتا ہے، میرا مولا درود بابا جبلال کئی زندہ کیے مردے علی نے حکم دا، بھائی بتا منکر کے اب وہ تجھ کو کیا معلوم ہوتا ہے، میرا مولا کسی کو کبریا پر جبریل کو تیغ علی سے کیا شکایت ہو، کسے استاد کا غصہ برا معلوم ہوتا ہے، میرا مولا کسی کو کبریا سرے میرا پردے سے صدا سن کر نبی بولے، بھئی یہ لہجہ جانا پہچانا ہوا معلوم ہوتا ہے، یہ لہجہ جانا پہچانا ہوا علی کے وصف پڑھ کر بزم میں پڑھتا ہوں یوں چہرے کہ چہروں سے دلوں کا مدعا معلوم ہوتا ہے، کہ چہروں سے دلوں کا مدعا اور بھکاری بن کے لے جاتے ہیں قدسی گھر پہ آ کر، نہ جانے روٹیوں میں کیا مزہ معلوم ہوتا ہے، نہ جانے روٹیوں میں کیا مزہ معلوم ہوتا ہے، جو ہوتا ہے شریک مجلس سرور بس ایک کے دل، بھائی وہ بندہ آرزوئے فاطمہ معلوم ہوتا ہے، وہ بندہ آرزوئے فاطمہ معلوم ہوتا ہے، نہیں خاک شفا جس میں وہ سجدے کا نشان، بھائی جبیں پر ایک داغ بد نما معلوم ہوتا ہے، جبیں پر ایک داغ بد نما بھائی علم کو دوش پر میرے جو دیکھا تو ملک بولے، بھئی یہ یہ بندہ حضرت عباس کا معلوم ہوتا ہے، یہ بندہ حضرت عباس کا معلوم ہوتا ہے۔ اور جب اکبر رن میں آئے تو سپاہ شام چیخ، یہ غازی ہے ہمیشہ مصطفیٰ معلوم ہوتا ہے، یہ غازی ہم شبیہ مصطفیٰ۔ آخری شعر المقطع۔ صدائیں غم کی قتل شے پہ سن کر کہتے تھے، یہ خیمہ شے کا ماتم کدا معلوم ہوتا ہے، یہ خیمہ شے کا ماتم کدا مقطع پیش کرتا۔ اور ملک آئے جو مجلس میں تو مجھ کو دیکھ کر بولے، ملک آئے جو مجلس میں تو مجھ کو دیکھ کر بولے، یہ میں ویسو سخانی تو شفا معلوم ہوتا ہے، یہ میں ویسو زخانی تو شفا معلوم ہوتا ہے، میرا مولا کسی۔ آپ حضرات سے گزارش ہے کہ ایک سورہ فاتحہ تمام منتظمین کے مرحومین کے لیے، اپنے مرحومین کے لیے، اور جن کا کوئی پڑھنے والا نہیں، اس سب کے لیے۔ بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم۔ فاتحہ۔ جب عابد بے کس کو پیام اجل آیا، جب عابد بے کس کو پیام اجل آیا، دنیا دغا باز کی مانند حسن کٹ کے کلے جا نکلا، مانند حسن کٹ کے کلے جا نکلا، جب عابد بے کس کو پیام اجل آیا، ظالم نے مریض شہ دلگیر کو ماں شبر کی طرح دلبر شبیر کو ماں، شبر کی طرح دلبر شبیر کو ماں، اولاد پیغمبر پہ مصیبت کا یہ دے، پیاسے کی عزادار کی رحلت کا یہ دے، اور مظلوم کے دلبر کی شہادت دے عاشور کے بعد اور مصیبت گئی اور اس غم سے جگر چاک ہے زہرا نبی اٹھتا ہے عزادار حسین ابن علی اٹھتا ہے عزادار حسین ابن علی وہ جیسے دم عابد بیکس کا سجاد الافغار کا باقر سے بچھڑ اور بگڑی ہوئی تقدیر غریبوں اجڑا ہوا گھر فاطمہ زہرا کا اجڑنا اجڑا ہوا گھر فاطمہ زہرا کا اجڑنا ویراں ہوا دربار ولی ابن ولی بجھتا ہے چراغ آج حسین ابن علی ارے بجھتا ہے چراغ حسین ابن علی کا بجھتا ہے چراغ حسین ابن علی کا آئی شب رحلت غم تازہ کی نشانی کچھ ہوش میں آیا شہید دلگیر کا جان اور باقر سے کہا لاؤ وضو کے پانی کو جو دیکھا تو ہوئی اشک فشان پانی کو جو دیکھا تو ہوئی اشک فشان رو کر کہا نشتر ہے یہ غم قلب و جگر 2 دن یہی پانی نہ ملا میرے پدر 2 دن یہی پانی نہ ملا میرے پدر صدقے ہوئے شانے میرے اموں کے جھولے میں اسی کے لیے تڑپے علی پھر آپ نے باقر سے کہا پاس بلا اس رات کو ہم تم سے جدا ہوتے ہیں دل پر اس رات کو ہم تم سے جدا ہوتے ہیں دل پر دین نبوی احمد سی جہاں کو سونپا گھر بار تمہیں اور تمہیں اللہ کو سونپا گھر بار تمہیں اور تمہیں اللہ کو سونپا سن لو یہ وصیت میری اے آنکھوں کے تارے ناطے کو میرے پیار سے رکھنا میرے پیار باعث حجوں میں یہ رہا ساتھ ہمارا اس کو نہ کبھی بھول کے قمچی کوئی مار اس کو نہ کبھی بھول کے قمچی کوئی مار افسوس کے حیوانوں پہ جس کے یہ کرم اس پہ کرے اخلاق پہ دروں کے ستم اس پہ کرے اخلاق پہ دروں کے قسم القصہ وضو کر کے مصلی پہ دہشت سے بدن کانپ گیا اشک بہا سجادے پہ سجاد پسینے میں نہا ہل ہل گیا گردوں جو لبے پاس بلا ہل ہل گیا گردوں جو لبے پاس ہلا آواز یہ آتی تھی شہ کرب و بلا یہ طاعت آخر ہے میرے ذہن ابا یہ طاعت آخر ہے میرے ذہن ابا کی وہ نصف शब और राज ये तकदीर का सजदा, नूरे नजरे कुश्ते शमशीर का सजदा, और पैगाम में अजल था कि वो दिलगीर का सजदा, जिस तरह के आशूर को शबीर का सजदा, जिस तरह के आशूर को शबीर का सजदा। अरे उठे जो मुसल्ले से तो गश कर गए सजदा, है मेरे बाबा का और मर गए सजदा, है मेरे बाबा का और मर गए सजदा, जब आबिद बेकस को। आले मोहम्मद सलावत। अज़ादारान मज़लूम करबला, अब मैं दरख्वास्त कर रहा हूँ इस अदारे के सरपरस्त और मस्जिद अली के वाइस प्रेसिडेंट कि वो आपसे ख़िताब करें, जनाब डॉक्टर आज़िम हुसैन।
Assalamu alaikum. Tonight's majlis, in which we commemorate the shahadat of our fourth holy imam, Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad. This will be the final majlis of this series. The tabut will come out tonight after the majlis for ziyarat, after the Maulana's speech. Matami Anjumans from across the United States as well as Pakistan will participate in the Shabadari tonight. Refreshments for the men will be available in the tent outside following the program, and the ladies' refreshments will be available in the banquet hall after the program. The program will conclude at the time of Fajr prayer, and it will be followed by breakfast. A few notes on upcoming programs. The annual Imam Hussain Day Conference will take place next Saturday, August 19th at 1:30 p.m. The next series of majalis here at the masjid will take place from August 25th to August 27th. In these majalis, we'll commemorate the shahadat of Bibi Sakina alayhi salam. These majalis will be addressed by Sayyid Sulaiman Abdi. The series after that will take place from September 3rd to September 7th. During this series, we'll commemorate the shahadat of Imam Ali Raza alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad, as well as the Arba'in of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, salawat Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad. So we look forward to seeing you and at these upcoming programs. The sponsors for tonight's program are the families of Anjuman Naujawanan Ali Akbar. Kindly recite Surah Fatiha for the sponsors of tonight's program, as well as for your marhumin and for those who have no one to recite Fatiha for them. Surah Fatiha. Sponsorship opportunities are available for the upcoming Majalis program. Please see Brother Shahryar Heather, Brother Mustafa Kareem, Brother Adil Nathani, or myself in the men's section. Or in the ladies, you can contact Sister Nahid Hamdani or Sister Hina Kareem for more information. There are those in our community tonight who are not feeling well. They're in need of our prayers. Many across the world who are facing various hardships, including war, hunger, natural disasters, religious persecution. Let us pray to Allah during these nights of Azad to relieve the suffering of these people. Kindly recite with me verse number 62 from Surah Namal 5 times. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma yujibul mustara iza da'ahu yakshifu su أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء 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 اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. Just a few housekeeping announcements. For your safety, we have security present outside the masjid as well as inside. We respectfully ask all parents to please keep the children with them throughout the duration of the program, as a large gathering is expected tonight. And please note the whereabouts of the children at all times. We also ask that you please respectfully cooperate with the volunteers, as they will be assisting with parking outside as well as the serving of the niyaz. Just a note from the parking team, kindly refrain from parking in the fire lanes so we can keep these open in the event of an emergency. Since we have some new folks here today, just we'll take a brief moment just to remind you of the services that the masjid is providing the community. We remind you that this is the only Shia masjid in New Jersey where prayers are offered 5 times a day. We have religious guidance and counseling available through the services of our resident alim, Maulana Rizvi. We have educational programs throughout the year for our youth. We have a funeral team, funeral services available 24/7 for ghusl and kafan. We have jashans and majalis throughout the year for the commemoration of the birth and the shahadat of all of our holy masumin. We have interfaith programs throughout the year. This masjid, for those of you who don't know, is also a polling station for the local and national elections. So we're not only serving our community, but the community outside as well. We have banquet halls available for your use downstairs. And we have 2 schools here. One is the Jafriya School, the weekend Islamic school that runs on Sunday. MashaAllah, we have over 250 children enrolled in the school. We have also our full-time Islamic school, Sadiq School, which is now open. For those of you who are here for the first time, you can see the building. It's in the back. It's a beautiful 30,000 square foot building equipped with 14 classrooms, cafeteria, as well as a gymnasium. We are accepting enrollment from pre-K all the way up to 3rd grade, so please consider enrolling your kids to learn in this full-time school that we have open. And also the upcoming project, which is going to open soon, is the Bibi Sakina daycare in the building in the front. That will be also opening soon, available for your service. So, all of these projects, again, come with your prayers. We ask for your continued support financially. Please consider making a donation towards the masjid tonight. Please also consider enrolling in the monthly ACH recurring contribution. That's also an option that's available. All donations are tax deductible. We have the permission from the marja for khums. And obviously the greatest reward will come from Allah. Without any further delay, I just wanted to take an opportunity also to thank our respected guest speaker, Syed Bilal Rizvi, who has graced us here the last few nights. We have learned a lot from your lectures. MashaAllah, they have been very thought-provoking, very enlightening. We look forward to welcoming you back to New Jersey soon in the future, inshallah. So without any further delay, it is my privilege to invite our guest speaker, Syed Bilal Rizvi, to address tonight's majlis. Please greet him with salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad.
Rahimallahu man qara'a Surat al-Fatiha. If we can extend this a little bit, please. Jazakallah. Yeah, perfect. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله، والصلاة والسلام على إمام القبلتين ونبي الحرمين وأفضل الثقلين وجد الحسن والحسين الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين والذين ذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على صاحب الدعوة النبوية والسولة الحيدرية والإسمة الفاطمية والحلم الحسنية والشجاعة الحسينية والعبادة السجادية والمآثر الباقرية والآثار الجعفرية والعلوم الكادمية والحجج الردوية والجود التقوية والنقاوة النقوية والحيبة العسكرية والغيبة الإلهية. اللهم عجل فرجه وسهل مخرجه. أما بعد، فقد قال الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم: والشعراء يتبعهم الغاوون وأنهم في كل واد يهيمون وأنهم يقولون ما لا يفعلون إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وذكروا الله كثيرا وانتصروا من بعد ما ظلموا وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. For the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Fatima to Zahra in particular, a second salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the hastening of the reappearance of the master of our time, and to give him our condolences as we commemorate the shahadat of his grandfather, a louder salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Indeed, one of the most famous incidents in the life of Imam Ali ibn al-Husayn Zainul Abidin alayhi salam is when the caliph of that time, Hisham ibn Abdul Malik, went to Hajj. When Hisham ibn Abdul Malik, he goes to Hajj, one of the things that Hisham wanted to do is that he wanted to go and pay his respects to Hajarul Aswad, the black stone. But every time Hisham ibn Abdul Malik would try to reach the black stone, you find because of the crowds of people, he would be denied from doing so. So at that moment, he decides that he will sit on the side, he'll have a throne made for him, and he'll watch the people at that moment. As he's watching the people do tawaf around the Kaaba, he notices that one man, he walks towards the people. And when he walks towards the people, they begin to split left and right. That in the way the Nile, it split for Musa, the people, they split for this individual, and he walks to the black stone and he kisses the black stone. That was that moment when Imam Zainul Abidin came in front of him. The moment Imam Zainul Abidin does this, Hisham ibn Abdul Malik, out of anger, he says, Man hada, that who is this? The moment he said that, you find it is stated in his vicinity was the poet by the name of Al-Farazdak. And the moment he says Manahada, Farazdak began to recite a qasida explaining who this is. That Farazdak, he says, Hada alladhi ta'riful batha'u wat'atahu, wal baytu ya'rifuhu wal hillu wal haramu. That, oh, you say that you don't know who this man is? The valley of Makkah knows who this man is. The Kaaba knows who this man is. Outside of the Haram, they know this man. The Haram knows this man. Hada ibn khayri ibadillahi kullihimu. Hada taqiyun naqiyyu tahirul alamu. Hada ibn Fatimatin in kunta jahilahu. Bijaddihi anbiya'ullahi qad khutimu. That if you say that you don't know him, this is the son of the greatest creation of Allah. This is the one who is pious and immaculate and distinguished. This is the son of Fatimatul Zahra. He is the one that with his grandfather, all of the prophets were sealed and finished. وَلَيْسَ قَوْلُكَ مَنْ هَادَ بِضَائِرِهِ Al-urbu ta'rifu man ankarta wal ajamu. You saying that you don't know him doesn't harm him in any way. Because the Arabs and the non-Arabs already know who he is. Kilta yadayhi ghiyatun yustawkafani. Kilta yadayhi ghiyatun amma naf'uhuma. Yustawkafani wala ya'ruhuma adamu. That both of his hands are like the rain. That in the way the rain benefits everyone, and the rain is not deprived, you find this individual, he benefits everyone. Sahlul khaliqati la tukhsha bawadiruhu, yazinu hutnan husnul khalki wa shiyamu. This is that individual, his nature is pleasant, his anger is not feared by anyone. That even when he is angry, it is only for the sake of Allah, and he doesn't go outside of that limit when he is angry. There are two traits which are his zinat and his beautification. The first of those traits is his beauty of character. The second is that inner nature that he has. Then after that it says that this is that man, Hammalu atqali aqwamin idaqtudihu, that he is the one that he carries the burden of the people upon his shoulders. Meaning others are not in need when Zainul Abidin is there. That's why it's stated, when the Imam was martyred, one famous scholar in Medina would say that giving charity in secrecy died with Zainul Abidin. So he says, this is the one who carries the burdens of the people upon his shoulder. That tahlu shama'ili wa tahlu indahu na'amu. Hulwu shama'ili wa tahlu indahu na'amu. This is the one, his character is beautiful, and for him to say yes is something which is pleasant to him. Meaning that he doesn't say no to other individuals. And then he says, Ma qala la qattu illa fi tashahudihi. The only time he says la is in tashahud. In other words, the only time he says no is when he says la ilaha illallah, there is no God besides Allah. Low kanat tashahud kanat la'ahu na'amu. Lawla tashahud, if it wasn't for that even his no would be a yes. إذا رأته قريش قال قائلها إلى مكارم هذا ينتهي الكرم. That when the Quraysh, they would see him, they would say that to this level kamal and perfection is reached. يغدي حياء ويغدى من محابته. that he lowers his head out of modesty. Look at this line. It says that he lowers his head out of modesty, but because of his haybat, everyone lowers their head in front of him. And then as the line it goes, it says this is that individual that when he goes to Ruknul Hatim, when he goes towards the Kaaba recognizes the fragrance of Zainul Abidin. You see, these lines over here from Farazdak, anyone who listens to such lines, their emotions are connected with the fadail of Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam. In other words, what a khatib and a lecturer may need 5, 6, 7 lectures for, you find that Farazdak in 27 lines, he emotionally connects his audience with the Imam. And what this goes to demonstrate is the important role that poetry plays in preserving the legacy of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. You know, considering the occasion that this is a majlis of Shabbidari, that there are poets from all over America who will come, they'll recite, you find that it is important for us to understand what is the importance of poetry in the school of Ahlul Bayt. You see, there was a famous scholar by the name of Ayatollah Munirul Khabbaz. And Munirul Khabbaz today is arguably the most famous lecturer in the Arabic language. And in terms of credentials, you find that he is the most credentialed lecturer who travels. Usually a person who is a muhakkik and a researcher, they may not be scholars of the mimbar. But this is one of those rare individuals that both of them gather within this personality. And this year on Shab-e Ashur, he gave a lecture where he said something very interesting. He said that in today's time period, there is no bigger vehicle to propagate the masayib of Imam al-Hussein, the message of Imam al-Hussein, the virtues of Imam al-Hussein, the Noha Khani, and that poetry for Imam al-Hussein. He says it is bigger than any speaker today. It is bigger than any book which has been written in today's world. And I'll give you an example. If a lecturer comes, no matter how famous he is, no matter how great that lecture is, how many people are going to go and listen to that lecture a second time? Maybe there's a small minority that will listen to it a second time. But you find if there is a book in today's world, they might not read it a second time. But there are individuals that when it comes to certain nohas, certain marthiyas, certain kalam of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, they'll listen to it every single day in the month of Muharram and Safar. Those lines of poetry are recited across masajid, across centers throughout the world. You know, to the extent that there are certain lines of poetry, they have become interwoven in the fabric of aza, that if that poetry is not recited, for many people, it's as if their experience of azadari is incomplete. You know, for example, when it comes to the martyrdom of Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, if a khatib comes on the mimbar and he doesn't recite the lines of Di'bal al-Khuzai, where Di'bal says, وَقُبُورٌ بِكُوفَانٍ وَأُخْرَى بِتَيْبَةٍ وَأُخْرَى بِفَخٍ نَالَهَا الصَّلَوَاتِ. That Di'bal, he said that poetry in front of the Imam, that these graves of Ahlul Bayt are scattered. There is a grave in Kufa, and there is a grave in Baghdad, and there is a grave in Fakh. And then after that, the Imam says, "Oh Di'bal, can I add to your poetry? وَقَبْرٌ بِتُوسٍ يَا لَهَا مِن مُصِيبَةٍ." And O Di'bal, there will be a grave in Tus whose musibat and sorrow will be great. You know, this line of poetry has become interwoven in the masayib of Imam al-Rida. No, I'll give you an example. You know, most everyone here, if not 100% of the crowd, their background is from the subcontinent. There are many individuals in the subcontinent that the Masaib of Sham-e Ghariba, the night which follows the day of Ashura, is not complete until they listen to that poem, Ghabrayegi Zainab. You know, that poem, which was actually written by an individual by the name of Dilgir Laknavi, who was a Hindu, but he became a Muslim. And he lived in India during the rule of the Nawabs, and when he became a Muslim, he changed his name to Ghulam Hussain. He says that what better name is the name that I am the servant of Hussein. So this kalam, you find that for many people, the experience of Sham-e Ghariba is not complete until they listen to this. What this goes to show is that poetry is something which is a part and parcel of aza. And for us to really get to the bottom of this, we need to understand this topic. And that's why tonight we'll examine the role of poetry in preserving the legacy of al-Bayt, and we'll do it in the following stages. Number one, we'll examine that what is poetry. Number two, we'll examine that why in the Quran and the Hadith we find praise of poetry and condemnation of poetry. Number three, we'll examine that how did Ahlul Bayt encourage the poets. From the fourth level, we'll examine who were the famous poets in the lives of the Aimma alayhimus salam. From the fifth level, we'll examine that in what ways does poetry preserve the memory of Imam al-Hussein. And from the sixth and final level, we'll examine that what poetry was recited on the day of Ashura. And based on this, we'll seek to come to an understanding about what is the nature of poetry. Now, when it comes to the first level of this discussion, when you look at language, you find that language is divided into nathar and nadam, that it is divided into prose and poetry. Prose is that dialogue which you have with each other. The speech over here is prose. When it comes to prose, there are no set rules. There aren't rules that you have to talk to somebody in this manner for it to be prose. But when it comes to poetry, you find poetry has certain features that make it a poem. The first thing is that poetry has a wazan, that there is a meter within poetry, there is a bahar. And this is one defining feature. A second defining feature of poetry is that it has a qasd and a purpose, that it cannot just be random words which are joined together. The words are joined together in relation to a particular topic. At the third level, you find that poetry often has a qafiyah. What this means is that the ending of the lines, they rhyme with each other. You know, you find Farazdak, when he gives his poetry about Imam Zainul Abidin, the qafiyah in that poem was the letter mim. He says, هَذَا الَّذِي تَعْرِفُ الْبَطْحَاءُ وَتَأْتَهُ وَالْبَيْتُ يَعْرِفُهُ وَالْهِلُّ وَالْحَرَمُ. That it ends with the letter meme on the word haram. هَذَا ابْنُ خَيْرِ عِبَادِ اللَّهِ كُلِّهِمُ هَذَا التَّقِيُّ النَّقِيُّ الطَّاهِرُ الْعَلَمُ. So you find in that manner over here that there is a meter, there is a purpose, and you find that there is a rhyme at the end in the final letter. So in that way, you find poetry has these features. But now the goal is, the question is that what does poetry address? You know, over here, when I'm giving this lecture, the majority of this lecture is addressing the minds. That I am addressing you, you are trying to come to an understanding. But poetry is something which moves a person by addressing their emotions. You see, one key factor in the life of a human being that moves them is their emotions. That's why when you look at politicians or people who are running for election, a majority of the time they go towards emotional appeal. Because emotional appeal is something which is very powerful in bringing about action. So in that sense, you find poetry is appealing to that. That is why the word shi'r, which is used in Arabic and Farsi and Urdu, is related to the word shu'ur. And the word shu'ur means for you to understand something which is within you. That's why we say sha'artu bil alam, that I felt pain, for example. I felt a particular emotion, for example. This inner feeling is what you find that the word shi'r is coming from. But another interesting thing to note is that the word shi'r in the Arabic language is also related to the word sha'r. And the word sha'r means hair. In other words, the poet oftentimes is very precise with his wording. It's almost as if he is splitting hairs. And through that splitting of the hairs, you find he is able to invoke emotion in an individual. Let me give you an example. If I said to you, the body of Imam al-Hussein was on the ground on the day of Ashura, and the head of Imam al-Hussein was on a spear, you understood what I'm saying. But there was a very famous poet in Arabic. He said this same line, but through poetry, he evoked a type of imagery and khayal in the mind of an individual, which really makes a person understand what was happening. This individual, his name was Sheikh Saleh al-Kawwaz. And he describes this by saying that كَأَنَّ جِسْمَكَ مُوسَى مُدْهَوَى سَائِكَ وَأَنَّ رَأْسَكَ رُوحُ اللَّهِ مُدْرُفِيَ. You know what he says? He says, "Oh Hussein, your body is like Musa, and your head is like Isa." What does this mean? He says, you are like Musa in the sense that when the tajalli of Allah came, Musa fell to the ground out of unconsciousness. There is an ayat within the Quran that Musa says, Arini andur ilayka, that, oh Allah, show me yourself so I can see you. So you know what Allah says to Musa? He says, Musa, lan tarani, you will never be able to see me. Walakin indur ilal jabali, but oh Musa, look at this mountain. In my own words, Musa, watch what I'm about to do. فَإِنِ اسْتَقَرَّ مَكَانَهُ فَسَوْفَ تَرَانِي. If this mountain remains, then it is possible that maybe you'll see me. فَلَمَّا تَجَلَّ رَبُّهُ لِلْجَبَلِ. But when Allah did his tajalli and his manifestation upon the mountain, جَعَلَهُ دَكًّا وَخَرَّ مُوسَى سَائِكًا. The mountain broke into pieces and Musa fell on the ground unconscious. In other words, he could have simply said the body of Imam Hussein is on the ground. But over here, he is with this imagery, he is saying, Hussein, you are like Musa, that you were so absorbed in the tajalli and the manifestation of Allah that even your body you were able to give up for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of Ashura. Then after that he continues. He says, وَكَأَنَّ رَأْسَكَ رُوحُ اللَّهِ مُدْرُفِيَ. Hussein, when your head was raised, your head was like Isa. In what way was it like Isa? In the way that Isa was raised to the heavens as a miracle. That, oh Imam al-Hussein, your head was a mu'jiza. That people would look at the head of the Imam, and the Imam would recite the ayat of the Quran that Am hasibta anna ashab al-kahfi wa raqimi kanu min ayatina ajaba. That do you suppose that the people of the cave and the inscription are an astonishing sign? But rather it is my head over here which is reciting the Quran. So you find in this manner, poetry invokes imagery. And that imagery takes you to the depth of your emotion in the manner that speech cannot do so. But now at the next level, the question it arises is that does the Quran and the Hadith praise poetry or does it condemn poetry? You'll have to let me finish the entire discussion before bringing out the pitchforks and the firewood. But there's an ayat of the Quran in Surah Al-Shu'ara, chapter 26, verses 224 to 227. Over there, the ayat it says, وَالشُّعَرَاءُ يَتَّبِعُهُمُ الْغَاوُونَ. That only the misguided follow the poets. وَأَنَّهُمْ فِي كُلِّ وَادٍ يَهِمُونَ. They wander into every single valley. They wander aimlessly. وَأَنَّهُمْ يَقُولُونَ مَا لَا يَفْعَلُونَ. And they say that which they don't act upon. Over here in this ayat, is this positive or is this negative? Over here, the Quran is speaking very negatively about the poets. No, I'll give you another example. There is a hadith in non-Shia sources which is found in Sahih al-Bukhari, and in our traditions it has been found ascribed to Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. Salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. In that tradition, the Imam, he says, لِأَنْ يَمْتَلِئَ جَوْفُ رَجُلٍ قَيْحًا يَرِيهِ خَيْرٌ مِنْ أَنْ يَمْتَلِئَ شِعْرًا. So it's stated over there, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Jazakallah. Thank you so much. So over there, the Imam and Rasulullah are ascribed to have said that it is better for the body of a person to be filled with pus than for it to be filled with poetry. So on one side, we see a strong condemnation of shi'r and poetry. But now when we come to the other side, there are also narrations which praise poetry. For example, Rasulullah says, Inna fi shi'r la hikmatan o la hikaman. That within poetry is wisdom, one example. Another tradition from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. The Imam says in a tradition, Man qala fina bayta shi'rin, banallahu lahu baytan fil jannah. That whoever recites a couplet for us Ahlul Bayt, Allah builds a house for that individual in paradise. So you find on one side there is a condemnation of poetry. But on the other side, you find that there is a praise of poetry. So the question that comes up is that how do we reconcile the two? And the answer will come after a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. It's a bit tricky, Mike, huh? A second salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Imam Zainul Abidin, a third salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Perfect, perfect. I think we got it. So you find that the question is, on one side, there is condemnation of poetry. On the second side, there is praise of poetry. So how do we reconcile the two? You find that both of these are reconciled within the Quran. You know, in Surah Al-Shu'ara, in those ayat which I recited, it said, وَالشُّعَرَاءُ يَتَّبِعُهُمُ الْغَاوُونَ وَأَنَّهُمْ فِي كُلِّ وَادٍ يَهِمُونَ وَأَنَّهُمْ يَقُولُونَ مَا لَا يَفْعَلُونَ. That the poets, the misguided, follow the poets. The poets, they wander into every valley. The poets, they say what they don't act upon. But then the Quran, it says, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. The only exception to this are those who have iman. وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. And they act righteously, number 2. وَذَكَرُوا اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا. They remember Allah greatly, number 3. وَانْتَصَرُوا مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا ظُلِمُوا. And they support the Mazlum, number 4. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّامٌ قَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ. So what this goes to demonstrate is that either the Quran is condemning all poetry and this is the exception, or the Quran is directed towards a certain form of poetry. You know, in that time period amongst the Arabs, what was poetry? Poetry was boasting about yourself, about your family members. It was about lewd topics, topics of no value. You know, I remember one day, I'll never forget. One day I was in a cafe, and there was a person who was working who spoke Arabic, and we began to speak. And as we're speaking, he says to me that you're interested in Arabic literature. I said, I am. He said that I have certain lines of poetry that I want you to hear. And he began to recite those lines of poetry. I can't quote them from the minbar, But the final line of poetry over there, the final line, it said, In hurrimat yawman ala deen Ahmadi, fakhudha ala deen al-Masih ibn Maryami. You know what it said? It said, it was talking about a woman. And it said that if she is haram for you on the deen of Rasulullah, then go and take her according to the deen of Isa. In other words, do what you want, your religion doesn't matter. So I said to that individual who wrote this line of poetry, he said to me, the writer was Yazid ibn Muawiyah. You find that this is the type of poetry that the Arab world would see. That Yazid would write lines of poetry which had no value. You know, when Sayyida Zainab was in the court of Yazid, Imam Zainul Abidin was there. Yazid, he recited that lines of poetry that Layta ashyakhi bi badrin shahidu. That I wish that my elders from Badr were here to see this. That today I have taken revenge for Badr and Hunayn. I say that was Badr a battle between Islam and Kufr, or was it a battle between two factions? This individual is saying that today, after the killing of Hussein, that revenge for Badr has been complete. You know, I say subhanallah, that even he realized that if there is anyone who represented the message of Rasulullah and Amir al-Mu'mineen on the day of Badr, it is Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. And if there is any revenge for Badr, then it is with Imam al-Hussein. So you find in that manner, these individuals would have poetry which was of no value. So what the Quran and the Hadith, they show is that if poetry is in the support of religion, it is positive. If poetry is in the support of moral values, it is positive. You know, there's a famous line of Arabic poetry. It says, إِذَا الْمَرْءُ لَمْ يَدْنَسْ مِنَ اللُّؤْمِ إِرْضُهُ فَكُلُّ رِدَاءٍ يَرْتَدِيهِ جَمِيلُ. It says that when a man doesn't dirty his character, then every form of clothing that he wears is beautiful on him. That if your character is not dirty, that whatever you wear, you'll look good within that. So you find this is something which is a positive share. But the final level is that what we see is that when you recite poetry, if it is in the defense of the madloom and the oppressed, you find it is something which has a great value in the eyes of Allah. And there was no one who was more madloom than Imam al-Hussein. That is why Ahlul Bayt, they went to a great extent to establish the poetry of Imam al-Hussein. You know, oftentimes we hear the word Sha'air al-Hussein. You know what the word Sha'air means is that a Sha'air is something which brings realization into you. You know, the Quran says, Inna Safa wal Marwa min Sha'air Allah. That basically all of these different sacraments and actions at Hajj, they allow you to recognize and to come to an understanding of an inner truth. And in the same way, all of these different sha'air for Imam al-Hussein, whether it is ziyarah, whether it is tawassul, whether it is doing sajda on the khaq of Karbala, whether it is poetry for Imam al-Hussein, you find that all of this was established by Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. So the first question is over here, is that how did the Imams of Ahlul Bayt establish poetry as an institution? So you find the first way that the Imams established poetry as an institution is that the Imams would reward the poets. You know, when Farazdak recited that qasida for Imam Zainul Abidin, Hisham ibn Abdul Malik, he had Farazdak thrown in prison in between Makkah and Medina. You know what the Imam does? The Imam sends 1,000 coins to Farazdak. The moment Farazdak receives those coins, he says, "Oh Imam, I did not do this for this coins, but I recited this poetry out of my love for you, for your forefathers." You know what the Imam replies? The Imam says that, "Oh Farazdak, we are from that household when we give something in the way of Allah, we don't take it back. In other words, I have already given this towards you, I don't want it back." So this is one example of the Imam gifting a poet. Another example is Dibal al-Khuzai. Dibal al-Khuzai, he comes to Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Rida, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. And when he comes to the Imam, he recites his famous qasida that Madarisu ayatin khalat min tilawatin wa manzilu wahyan muqfarul arasati diyaru aliyan wa hamzata wa ja'farin wa sajjad dilta fanati. That he says that those schools where the ayat of the Quran were taught, and those houses have become empty today where revelation would come. The house of Hamza and Ja'far and Amir al-Mu'mineen and Imam al-Sajjad. As Dibal is reciting these lines of poetry, the Imam, he gifts 10,000 coins to Dibal made out of gold. 10,000 coins is not a small amount back then. And even today, it's not a small amount as well. But you find that the Imam, he gifts this to Dibal al-Khuzai. A third example. There was a poet by the name of Qumayt ibn Zayd al-Asadi. Qumayt ibn Zayd al-Asadi lives both in the time of Imam al-Baqir and in the time of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, salawatullahi alayhima. Qumayt, he comes to the Imam and he recites poetry for Imam al-Baqir. When he recites poetry for Imam al-Baqir, you know what the Imam replies? The Imam says, Ya Qumayt, Lo kana indana malun la a'tainaka. That, O Qumayt, if I had mal, if I had wealth right now, I would give it to you, but I don't have anything. Walakin laka ma qala Rasulullah li Hassan ibn Thabit. But for you, I will say the same thing which Rasulullah said to Hassan ibn Thabit, who was a poet in the time of Rasulullah, that La zilta mu'ayyadan bi ruhil qudus ma dababta anna ahl al-Bayt. That, O Qumayt, as long as you are reciting poetry for us, Ahlul Bayt, Ruh al-Qudus, and the Holy Spirit is supporting you. So you find that the Imam once again demonstrates that if he had wealth, he would have given this. So the first level that the Imams establish poetry and encourage the poets is by giving a reward to the poets. The second way the Imams establish poetry is that they would openly make dua for the shu'ara of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. You know, this same Qumayt, he meets Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. And he meets the Imam. When the Imam is at Hajj, he recites some lines of poetry for the Imam. You know what the Imam does? The Imam, he looks to the Kaaba and he says, Allahumma arham Qumayt. Then he turns away from the Kaaba. Second time, Allahumma arham Qumayt, that may Allah have mercy on Qumayt. 3 times he asks for mercy for Qumayt ibn Zayd al-Asadi. And then the Imam, in a separate occasion, he says, Allahumma gfir lil Qumayt ma taqaddama min dambihi wa ma ta'akhar. That, oh Allah, forgive the past sins of Qumayt and any future mistakes that he may make. What he has done in secret, forgive, and what he has done openly, forgive. So you find at the first level, the Imams would reward the poets. At the second level, the Imams would make dua for the poets. The third level, the Imams would listen to the poets and they would tell the poets to recite. You know, one poet by the name of Abu Harun al-Makfuf. Makfuf means that he was blind. He comes into the house of Imam al-Sadiq. You know, there is no bayaz in his hand. There is nothing that shows that I'm ready to recite. He doesn't say to the Imam that I'm going to recite poetry. But as soon as Abu Harun al-Makfuf enters, without him saying anything, the Imam al-Sadiq says to him, Anshidni fil Hussein. That the moment he enters, Imam al-Sadiq encourages him. He says, recite something for my grandfather Hussein. Then after that, Abu Harun al-Makfuf begins to recite. The Imam says, La, don't recite like this. Anshid kama tunshidun. Recite how you normally recite. Kumayt says, what, you find that Abu Harun al-Maqfuf says, what do you mean? He says, Tartihi kama in the Qabr al-Hussein. That he gives an adab to every poet for Imam al-Hussein. And you know what that adab and that etiquette is? He says, O Abu Harun, when you recite poetry for my grandfather Hussein, recite as if you were by the grave of Abu Abdullah. And that is an etiquette which Imam Sadiq is giving to every Marsiya Khan, every Soz Khan, every Noha Khan, that when you recite, this is the minimum. So Abu Harun al-Maqfuf, he begins to recite poetry of another poet, Sayyid al-Himyari. And he says, Umrur ala jadat al-Hussein faqul li a'dumihi zakiya. That when you go by the body of a Hussein, say to the body of Imam al-Hussein. And at that point, Imam Sadiq begins to cry. And when Imam Sadiq begins to cry, Abu Harun stops reciting. You know what Imam Sadiq does at that moment? He says, Zidni bayanan. That keep reciting more. So you see how Imam Sadiq is encouraging him. So the Imams would give rewards to the poets. They would make dua for the poets. They would encourage the poets to recite. You know, Kumayt, when he sees Imam Sadiq in that incident, it's stated that Kumayt, he comes to the Imam in front of the Kaaba, and he says, Ansha'tu sheran. He says, oh my master, I've composed some lines of poetry. Imam Sadiq says, oh Kumayt, these are the days of Hajj. Hadihil ayam ayamu dhikrullah. That these are the days where we remember Allah. These are not days for poetry. But then after that, Kumayt says, O Mawla, Ya Sayyidi, these lines of poetry were for you. And at that moment, Imam Sadiq says, then recite. You know what this goes to show? Is that the dhikr of Ahlul Bayt is an extension of the dhikr of Allah. Imam Sadiq is demonstrating all poetry. Put it to the side in these days of Hajj. But if that poetry is for Allah, if it is for us, Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, whether it is Hajj or any other occasion, you should recite that. So you find in this manner, the Imams would listen to the poets. But then after that, there is one more way which the Imams would encourage the poets, which is even more strange. The Imams would often complete the lines of poetry by the poets. That Debil al-Khuzai is reciting his poetry, and he is saying, وَقُبُورٌ بِكُوفَانٍ. There are graves in Kufa. وَقَبْرٌ بِفَخٍ وَقَبْرٌ بِتَيْبَةٍ نَالَهَا صَلَوَاتِ. And as he's reciting all of this poetry, Imam al-Rida says, O De'bal, can I give you a line which is tamamu qasidatik? That can I give you a line which will finish your qasida? So De'bal says, what line is that? The Imam says, وَقَبْرٌ بِتُوسٍ يَا لَهَا مِن مُصِيبَةٍ. That, O De'bal, there will be one grave by Tus whose musibah will be great. So the Imams reward the poets. They make dua for the poets, number 2. They listen to the poets, number 3. They encourage the poets, number 4. They have even completed the poetry of the poets. But at the 6th level, the Imams would show the ajar and the reward for writing poetry for them. You see, the Imams have a famous narration, Man qala fina bayta shairan banallahu lahu baytan fil jannah. That whoever recites a couplet of poetry for us, Allah will make a house for him in paradise. But over here, the question is that what if it's not my skill set to recite poetry? Not everyone is able to recite poetry. That's why there is a second set of narrations. In that second set of narrations, the Imams are not saying man qala. They are saying man anshada fil Hussein sha'ran. You know what the difference between a munshid and a shair is? A shair recites its own poetry, but a munshid recites the poetry of another individual. Yani, how great is Imam al-Hussein? that if you compose your own poetry, for you is paradise. But even if you recite the poetry of another individual, all you do is you take the poetry of another person which he worked hard on, you recite it, you cry, others cry, paradise is for you. You find this is Aba Abdullah. And many people, when they hear these narrations, they become worried. That how can Allah give Jannat for something which is so small? I say, do we not have the narrations which all Muslims accept? The one who says, La ilaha illallah, for him is paradise. Yani, in other words, is every problem, does it come to your mind when it comes to the name of Imam al-Hussein? That when it comes to Imam al-Hussein, every problem is remembered at that moment. The same answer for that narration is the same answer for these narrations when it comes to poetry. And that's why when you look in the lives of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, there were certain poets who had a great position with Ahlul Bayt. For example, in the time of Rasulullah, there was Hassan ibn Thabit. Of course, what later happened to Hassan ibn Thabit is a historical discussion for another time. But Hassan ibn Thabit was an individual that without the poetry of Hassan ibn Thabit, you find that the meaning of Mawla on the day of Ghadir does not carry the same power. You know, Allama al-Amini, when he wrote his famous encyclopedia about the day of Ghadir, a large portion of that encyclopedia was collecting poetry about the day of Ghadir. And one of those lines of poetry was by Hassan ibn Thabit. Hassan ibn Thabit, after Rasulullah said, Man kuntu mawla, fahada aliyun mawla, he recited the lines of poetry, Faqum ya Ali. That, O Ali, stand at this moment. For now you are imaman wa hadiya. That you are the imam and you are the hadi and the guide. Anyone who has examined the poetry of Hassan ibn Thabit knows that based upon this poetry, it is clear that Rasulullah was referring to imamat on the day of Ghadir. So you find in that manner, Hassan serves an important role. Another poet in the time of Imam Zainul Abidin was Farazdak. You know, Farazdak, I recited the qasida which he said for the Imam. Farazdak was thrown in jail for this qasida. Farazdak went through difficulty for the praise that he gave to Ahlul Bayt. Another example. Qumayt ibn Zayd al-Asadi, whose incidents I mentioned, another example. But then there was another poet by the name of Syed al-Himyari. You know, Syed al-Himyari was not a Sayyid in the sense that he was from Banu Hashim, but he was called Sayyid because he was the best of the poets. And Syed al-Himyari is the only poet, when he would recite poetry, Imam as-Sadiq would say, stop. That I can't handle the Masayib anymore. You know, Syed al-Himyari recited one line of poetry which broke the heart of Imam as-Sadiq. You know what he said? He said, Ida atayta qabr al-Hussein. That when you come to the grave of Imam al-Hussein, wabki alayhi ka mu'vilatin atat yawman liwahidiha al-maniya. He said that when you go to the grave of Abdullah, cry like that mother who has one son. And on that very day, she lost that one son. Imam as-Sadiq cried so much at the poetry of Syed al-Himyari that the Imam said, Syed al-Himyari, stop the Messiah, but I can't handle anymore. So you find this is another example. After that, in the time of Imam al-Rida, you have Di'bal al-Khuzai. You know, Di'bal al-Khuzai is that individual that when the Imam gives a number of coins to Di'bal, he gives him money for reciting poetry. Di'bal says, Oh Mawla, I don't want your money, but I want one of your shirts. And this shirt will be a source of shafa'ah for me. So you find this is another example. But no, another poet in the time of Ahlul Bayt was Ibn Sakit. Ibn Sakit was somebody who was a lover of Imam Ali al-Hadi, and he lives in the time of Imam Ali al-Hadi. You know, Ibn Sakit was such a famous poet, such a famous adib, an expert in literature, that Mutawakkil hired him to be the tutor for his sons. And one day, as he's tutoring the sons of Mutawakkil, you find Mutawakkil walks in and he sees Ibn Sakit. He says to Ibn Sakit, "Oh Ibn Sakit, who is greater, my sons or Hassan and Hussein?" You know what Ibn Sakit says? He says, "Jananta, that you are a man who is majnoon. Forget Hassan and Hussein, the slave of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Qambar is greater than your sons." So you find in this manner, the poet who uses his language to speak the truth has a great maqam. That's why when you look throughout history, there are individuals whose names have been immortalized through the poetry they recited for Ahlul Bayt. And Ahlul Bayt would give tawfiq to these individuals. You know, there was a poet by the name of As-Sa'di. And As-Sa'di has a famous book by the name of the Gulistan. Within the Gulistan, there is a line of poetry for Rasulullah. And it says, "Balaghal ula bikamalihi." He is the one who reached the heights because of his perfections. Kashafa doja bi jamalihi. Whenever there is darkness, by the beauty of Rasulullah, that darkness is removed. It's stated that Sa'di, he goes to sleep. And when he goes to sleep, he sees Rasulullah. Rasulullah says to him that recite your qasida in front of me. So he recites the qasida, "Balaghal ula bi kamalihi. Kashafa doja bi jamalihi. Hasunat jami'u khisalihi." All of his qualities are beautiful. Rasulullah says to him, "Now finish your qasida." He says, "What do you mean? This is all I wrote." He says, "The way you finish it is you say, "Wasallu alayhi wa alihi." So you find in that manner, that's another example. No, there's another poet as well. There was a poet by the name of Abdul Baqi al-Umari. And the title suggests whose lineage he was from. So Abdul Baqi al-Umari becomes a lover of Ahlul Bayt. And he recites a qasida for Amir al-Mu'mineen. And when you go to Najaf today, within the dome and the qubba of Amir al-Mu'mineen, that qasida is written. And you know what that qasida is? That qasida, it says, "Antal Ali alladhi fawqa al-ula rufiya. Bibatni makkata fi wasat al-bayti idwadiya." It says that you are Ali. And over here, Ali, he uses it in two meanings. That you are the elevated one whom in Makkah, when you came in the Kaaba, from that moment, Allah honored you. So you find this individual, an individual who wasn't from the school of Ahlul Bayt, comes to the school of Ahlul Bayt, and he is immortalized through his poetry. No, I'll give you another example. There was a famous poet in Iraq whom everyone knows. He recites a line of poetry which shows how powerful imagery can be. And that line of poetry, it said, "Ya barku in ji'tal gharifa kullahu, aturaka ta'lam man bi ardika mawdahu." It says, "O lightning, when you come to the land of Najaf, say to the land of Najaf, do you know who is buried within you? بل فيك ابن إمران الكليم وبعده إيسى يكفيه وأحمد." Within you, Isa is there. Within you, Musa is there. Within you, Rasulullah is there. بل فيك نور الله جل جلاله. But within you, the nur of Allah is there. You know, what does this mean? Musa is not buried in Najaf. Isa was raised to the heaven. Rasulullah is in Medina. But the poet, using his imagery, he explains in the final line, "Bal fika wasiyul Mustafa fika Aliyun al-Murtada." The fact that the wujud of Ali ibn Abi Talib is there in Najaf, it's as if Rasulullah is in Najaf. It's as if Isa is in Najaf. It's as if Musa is in Najaf. It is as if the nur of Allah manifests from Najaf al-Ashraf. You find this is that power. You find people whose names that you don't know, those names are remembered because they wrote poetry for Abu Abdullah. You know, many of you have heard the name Mu'inuddin Chishti. Shah Ast Hussain, Badshah Ast Hussain, Deen Ast Hussain, Deen Pana Ast Hussain. Now I'll ask you a question. The moment I recited this, you finished the line. Name me just one other line of poetry by Mu'inuddin Chishti. You're not able to do it. He wrote many different things, but that what he wrote for Imam al-Hussein became immortalized. So it is not that Imam al-Hussein is muhtaj upon the poets, but rather anyone who takes his name, he himself becomes elevated. You know, any khatib, any poet will testify, we ourselves have no value. If there is any honor within our lives, it is because we take in the name of Ahlul Bayt and they bestowed that honor. So you find this is that reality when it comes towards it. And that is why you find that poetry serves such an important function that even on the day of Ashura, poetry was recited. And that poetry was called a rajas. You know, amongst the Arabs, before they would go to battle, they would introduce themselves, they would introduce their families through battlefield poetry. And you find that the poetry of the ashab of Imam al-Hussein is recorded. For example, there was one companion by the name of Bishr ibn Amr al-Hadrami. Bishr or Bashir ibn Amr al-Hadrami, he was a companion of Imam al-Hussein that when he was in Karbala, he got news that his son was captured. That his son on the outskirts of Karbala was captured. So Imam al-Hussein says to him that Anta fi hillin min bayati, that you are free from any obligation to me, go and take care of your son. You know what he replies by saying? He says that may the animals of the desert eat me if I leave you, O Hussein. In other words, who is my son and who is the son of Fatima Zahra? And this Bishr, when he recites his poetry on the day of Ashura, he says, Al-yawm ya nafsu la takhsha min al-kuffar. That, O soul, today, do not fear the disbelievers. That wal-yawm tudzayna bi kulli asan. That the first line was Al-yawm ya nafsu ulki ar-Rahman. That, O soul, today you are going to meet Allah. وَالْيَوْمْ تُجْزَيْنَا بِكُلِّ أَحْسَانٍ. And today you will be rewarded for every good that you did. فَكُلُّ شَيْءٍ فَانٍ. And in reality, everything in this world will be annihilated. You see, what this companion of Imam al-Hussein shows through this poetry is that if life is temporal, if life is limited, and I am going to die, then what better way is there than to die with Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam? That in that manner, each of these companions, when they would recite their poetry, they would demonstrate that their dhat and their being is fana and annihilated in the ishq of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. That when you look at these individuals, you know, the traditions they say, that in your final moments, a Muslim says, La ilaha illallah. That all of the traditions they say that. But look at the maqtal. These companions in their final moment, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Assalamu alayka yabna Rasulallah. In other words, they are showing that to send salam upon the wali of Allah is a manifestation of Tawheed. That our Tawheed is Hussein over here. And they demonstrated that in their poetry. That Hur on the day of Ashura, he says, Ana al-Hur wa ma'wa dayfi. Adribu fi a'nakikum bis-sayfi. That I am Hur, I take care of my guests. I will strike you upon your necks in defense of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. No, another companion by the name of Zuhair ibn al-Qayn. He says, Ana Zuhairun wa ana ibn Qayni. Aduduhum bis-sayfan Husayni. That I am Zuhair, the son of Qayn. I will use my sword to defend Hussein. But no, as you look, another rajas from the day of Ashura is when Ali Akbar goes to the Maqtal. And when Ali Akbar goes to the Maqtal, he says, Ana Ali ibn al-Husayn ibn Ali. Nahnu wa baytullahi awla bin nabi. أضربكم بالسيف أحامي عن أبي ضرب غلام قرشي علوي. He says that I am Ali, the son of Hussein, the son of Ali. I will strike you with my sword in defense of my father, a strike of somebody who is from Quraysh, somebody who is Hashimi, somebody who is Alawi. But as we examine all of the poetry which was stated on the day of Ashura, we remember those lines that Imam al-Hussein said to Imam Zainul Abidin. The Imam said to Imam Zainul Abidin that, O Sajjad, tell my Shia, Mahama sharibtum adhba ma'in fadkuruni. أو سمعتم بشهيد أو غريب فاندبوني أنا السبت الذي من غير جرم قتلوني. That he says that, O Sajjad, tell my Shia that whenever they drink cold water, remember me. When they hear the news of a shaheed, remember me. When they hear the news of somebody who is gharib and alone, remember me. I am that grandson of Rasulullah. Without doing anything wrong, they killed me. And then after that, he says, Laytakum fi yawmi ashura jami'an tanduruni. That there is one thing from the day of Ashura that I wish you saw. Kayfa astasqi li tifli فَأَبَوْا أَن يَرْحَمُونِي. I wish you saw that moment on the day of Ashura when I was asking water for Ali Asghar, but instead of water, an arrow was fired towards Ali Asghar. You know, tonight we remember the Masayib of Imam Zainul Abidin. And what Masayib was it that the Imam, he remembers into his final moment? You know, when a companion by the name of Minhali comes to the Imam and he says, Oh Imam, what was that most difficult moment? Imam is Sajjad. He says, Asham, Asham, Asham. That 3 times he says Asham. You know, there were 3 difficult moments in Sham. The first was the bazaar in the marketplace of Sham. You know, there is one narration in Biharul Anwar where Imam al-Baqir says to his father, Oh father, how did they take us over there? Imam Zainul Abidin says that when we were going to Sham, all of the women were upon horses without saddles. In front of us was the head of Hussein. From all sides was the army of Yazid. Their arrows would be pointed towards us. And whenever any of our women would cry, they would use those arrows to poke at us. After that, they come to the door of Sham. You know, some narrations state that for hours al-Bayt, they stood at that door of Sham. One riwayat, it says that Shimar, he takes the head of Imam al-Hussein and he hangs it upon that door over there. The moment Kulthum, she sees the head of Imam al-Hussein, she says, Wa Jadda wa Rasulallah, Hada Ra'su Habibik al-Hussein Maslubun ya Rasulallah. That, oh Rasulallah, look at your Hussein today. That the head of Hussein is hanging. There is another narration about Sham. This one is narrated by Imam al-Baqir. The Imam says that when we entered the court of Sham, everyone in that marketplace, they would say these Boghat and Baghis and rebels have come. That people, they would throw rocks upon us. People would pour boiling water upon us. One point it came that the boiling water is poured on Imam Imam Zainul Abidin. And at that moment, the turban of Imam Zainul Abidin, it catches on fire. You know, it's stated, there was a companion of Rasulullah by the name of Sal ibn Sa'd al-Sa'idi. Sal, he sees the Ahlul Bayt. And he says that, is this the Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet? They say, O Sal, that the earth may swallow its inhabitants for such a day has come. Sal, he goes to Imam Zainul Abidin and he says, O Ali ibn al-Hussein, that I am a companion of your grandfather. Is there anything I can do for you? You know what the Imam says? The Imam says, O Sal, bring me a piece of cloth. Sal says, I didn't understand. Why does this man want a piece of cloth? He says, the moment I brought that cloth to him, he takes that cloth, that chain within his neck, he places that cloth within the chain, and he says, O Sal, from Kufa to Sham, this chain has been burning my neck. Then that moment it comes that they enter the court of Sham. You know, when they enter that courtyard, it's stated at that moment that Zainab and Kulthum, they recognize the wife of Yazid. The wife of Yazid, she looks at that caravan and she says, Min ayyi biladin antum, which city are you from? Sayyida Zainab says, Nahnu min bilad al-Madina. The moment Hind, she hears Medina, she comes off the throne, she sits on the ground. She says that I used to be a servant in a house in Medina. Sayyida Zainab says, which house were you a servant in? She says that I used to serve the house of Ali and Fatima. She says that, do you know anyone in that house? She says that I know Zainab, I know Hussein. Sayyida Zainab says, oh Hind, if you want to know Hussein, that is the head of Hussein. That head which your husband, he takes his stick and he hits the teeth of. That is Abu Abdullah. And oh Hind, if you want to know who I am, oh Hind, I am Zainab. Ahlul Bayt, after that, they're thrown in that prison in Sham. And you know who was martyred within that prison. But you know, eventually a time it comes that Yazid, he frees Ahlul Bayt. Imam Zainul Abidin says, oh Yazid, the first condition is that you give us a house to mourn in. These women haven't been able to mourn since Karbala. The second condition is that you return all of the heads of the Shohada. You know, it's stated that as the heads of the Shohada were coming, that Kulthum would take the head of Abbas, and Layla would take the head of Ali Akbar. And you find one point it comes where the head of a 6-month infant is brought. The moment that head it comes, Rabab looks to the head of Ali Asghar. And as Rabab looks at the head of Ali Asghar, she says, oh Ali Asghar, do they slaughter children like you, oh Ali Asghar? Animals are meant to be slaughtered in this manner, not children, oh Ali Asghar. After that, the head of Abu Abdullah, it comes. The moment the head of the Imam, it comes, all of the women, they say, Wa Husayna, Wa Ghariba, Wa Madluma. After that, all of those tabarrukat and items, they came back. The first thing which comes back is an alam and a flag. The moment the women, they see that flag, they say, Wa Abbasa. After that, 2 earrings, they come back. The moment they see those earrings, All of them look towards the Rabab. The one who would wear those earrings is buried in that prison in Sham. You know, after that, one ringgit comes back. You know what ring that was? As the body of Imam al-Hussein laid on the plains of Karbala, everyone was looting the body of Hussein. Somebody would take the shirt of Hussein. Somebody would take the amama of Hussein. But one mal'oon, he says that I saw on the hand of Hussein was a ring. He says, when I went to the body of Hussein, I tried to pull that ring off. But that ring, it wouldn't come off. So you know what he does? He says that at that moment, I took my dagger. I went to the hand of Hussein. I cut the finger of Abu Abdullah. You find after that, the shirt of Imam al-Hussein, it comes. al-Bayt, they begin to leave Sham. As they're leaving Sham, they're going towards Medina. But Imam Zainul Abidin says, oh my aunt, shall we go to Medina or shall we go towards Karbala? All of the women, they say, let's go towards Karbala. You know, as this caravan is going towards Karbala, it is stated that Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari was in Karbala. And he was there with a servant by the name of Atiyah. Atiyah, he speaks to Jabir because Jabir had become blind. And he says that, oh Jabir, there is a caravan of black flags coming, oh Jabir. Jabir says, oh Atiyah, if it's Ibn Ziyad, let us hide. Atiyah says, oh Jabir, this is a caravan of mostly children and women. Jabir then says that, is there any men from amongst that caravan? Atiyah says that there is one old man over there. Jabir, he goes to Imam Zainul Abidin and he says, oh man, who are you? Imam Zainul Abidin says, oh Jabir, I am Ali ibn al-Hussein. Jabir says, oh Ali ibn al-Hussein, why does Atiyah say that there was an old man in that caravan? That what did Karbala do to Imam Zainul Abidin? Imam Zainul Abidin says, oh Jabir, I wish you saw the day of Ashura. Oh Jabir, I wish you saw when the head of Abu Abdullah was cut, oh Jabir. In that way he tells the Masaib to Jabir. But after that, that moment it comes where each of the women, they begin to go to the grave of Abu Abdullah. It's stated that when Sayyida Zainab, the final line of Musibah, that Sayyida Zainab, she goes to the grave of her brother. When she comes to the grave of Imam al-Hussein, she says, oh my brother, forgive Zainab. I say, oh Zainab, you did everything for Abu Abdullah. That why are you asking for forgiveness at this moment? Sayyida Zainab says, oh my brother, you gave me one amanat and responsibility, but your amanat I didn't bring with me. Your amanat I left in that prison in Sham. The taboot of Imam Zainul Abidin is about to come. You know, the Imam, he remembers this Masaib for the rest of his life. That time it comes when the Imam is upon his deathbed. And it's stated that as Imam Zainul Abidin is upon his deathbed, Imam al-Baqir comes and sits on the chest of Imam Zainul Abidin. The moment Imam al-Baqir sits on the chest of Imam Zainul Abidin, Imam Zainul Abidin begins to cry. Imam al-Baqir says, oh father, why are you crying? I am here to comfort you. These are your final moments. Imam Zainul Abidin says, oh my son Baqir, in my final moments, you are sitting upon my chest. but I remember the day of Ashura, that who was sitting upon the chest of my father. Imam al-Zaman in Ziyaratun Naya, he says, that point it comes was Shimar jalisun ala sadrik, that Shimar was sitting upon the chest of Hussein, wa mulighun sayfahu ala nahrik, and as he was sitting upon the chest of Abu Abdullah, he begins to move his sword to cut the neck of Imam al-Hussein, Matam Hussein.
راہوں میں سارباں کو چھاؤں ملی نہ سایہ، راہوں میں سارباں کو چھاؤں ملی نہ سایہ، راہوں میں سارباں کو چھاؤں ملی نہ سایہ، بیتاب دھوپ میں ہے زنجیر کا ستایا، بیتاب دھوپ میں ہے زنجیر کا ستایا، راہوں میں سارباں کو چھاؤں ملی نہ سایہ، راہوں میں سارباں کو چھاؤں ملی نہ سایہ، زینب کے سر میں اب تک ہے ریت کربلا کی، زینب کے سر میں اب تک ہے ریت کربلا کی، رسی نے بازوؤں میں کالا نشان بنایا، رسی نے بازوؤں میں کالا نشان بنایا، راہوں میں سارباں کو چھاؤں ملی، پردیسیوں کی قبروں میں تربت سکینہ، پردیسیوں کی قبروں میں تربت سکینہ، کس نے ہے پھول ڈالے، کس نے دیا جلایا، کس نے ہے پھول ڈالے، کس نے دیا جلایا، راہوں میں سارباں کو چھاؤں ملی نہ، اجڑے گھروں میں گونجی آواز ہائے اکبر، اجڑے گھروں میں گونجی آواز ہائے اکبر، صغرا کو جب پھوپھی نے رو کر گلے لگایا، صغرا کو جب پھوپھی نے رو کر گلے لگایا، راہوں میں سارباں کو چھاؤں ملے نہ سا، او جانا کچہریوں میں چھوٹا نہ بیویوں کا جانا، کچہریوں میں چھوٹا نہ بیویوں کا، ایسا کسی عدو نے دربار میں بلایا، ایسا کسی عدو نے دربار میں بلایا، راہوں میں سارواں کو چھاؤں ملے نہ سایہ، بیتاب دھوپ میں ہے زنجیر کا ستایا، راہوں میں سارباں کو چھاؤں ملے نہ سایہ، یا حسین یا حسین
کھول لیں آپ لوگ، پیچھے ہو جاؤ، بہت جگہ ہے پیچھے، حسین حلقے کھول لیں پیچھے، جو ماتمی ہوں آگے آ جائیں، ماتمی آگے آ جائیں، یا حسین یا حسین، سارے ماتمی آگے آ جائیں، بسم اللہ، یا حسین 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 یا حسین
مل کے صدا لگائیں. غریب قافلہ سالار خون روتا رہا. غریب قافلہ سالار خون روتا رہا. غریب قافلہ سالار. سب مل کے جواب دیں. غریب قافلہ سالار خون روتا رہا. 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 سب صدا لگائیں. بسم اللہ. غریب قافلہ سالار خون روتا رہا. 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 غریب سفر میں عابد بیمار. سفر میں عابد بیمار خون روتا رہا. غریب قافلہ سالار خون روتا رہا. غریب قافلہ سالار خون روتا رہا. سفر میں عابد بیمار. سفر میں عابد بیمار سفر میں عابد بیمار سفر میں عابد بیمار خون روتا رہا غریب قافلہ سالار خون روتا رہا غریب قافلہ سالار خون روتا رہا
سب مل کے جواب دیں بسم اللہ
ہجوم عام تھا پتھر تھے کھولتا پانی ہجوم عام تھا پتھر تھے کھولتا پانی جو پہنچا شام کے بازار جو پہنچا شام کے بازار خون روتا رہا غریب قافلہ سالار خون روتا رہا غریب قافلہ سالار خون روتا رہا قافلہ سالار خون روتا رہا غریب سکینہ آتی تھی بھائی کے سامنے جو کبھی سکینہ آتی تھی بھائی کے سامنے جو کبھی بہن کے دیکھ کے رخسار بہن کے دیکھ کے رخسار خون روتا رہا غریب قافلہ سالار خون روتا رہا غریب قافلہ سالار خون روتا رہا قافلہ سالار
سب مل کے جواب دیں پھر پڑھو
سکینہ آتی تھی بھائی کے سامنے جو کبھی سکینہ آتی تھی بھائی کے سامنے جو کبھی بہن کے دیکھ کے رخسار بہن کے دیکھ کے رخسار خون روتا رہا غریب قافلہ سالار خون روتا رہا ستم کیا کسی ظالم نے جب سکینہ پر ستم کیا کسی ظالم نے جب سکینہ پر تو کر کے یاد علمدار تو کر کے یاد علمدار خون روتا رہا غریب قافلہ سالار خون روتا رہا
پھر پڑھو
کمر جھکا کے وہ بازار سے گزرتا رہا کمر جھکا کے وہ بازار سے گزرتا رہا ردا کا پہلا آزادار ردا کا پہلا آزادار خون روتا رہا غریب قافلہ سالار خون روتا رہا یہ رسیوں میں جو باغی ہے آل احمد ہے، یہ رسیوں میں جو باغی ہے آل احمد ہے، سنی نہیں کی جو گفتار، سنی نہیں کی جو گفتار، خون روتا رہا غریب تھا بلا سالار، خون روتا رہا سفر میں عابد بیمار، سفر میں عابد بیمار، خون روتا رہا غریب تھا بلا سالار، خون روتا رہا یا حسین 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 حسین یا 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 حسین حیا علی خیر العمل، حیا علی خیر العمل، حیا علی خیر العمل، حیا علی خیر یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین حیا علی خیر العمل، حیا علی خیر العمل، حیا علی خیر العمل، حیا علی خیر یا حسین 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 حیا علی خیر العمل، حیا علی خیر العمل، حیا علی خیر العمل یا حسین 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 چھد گیا برچی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ اماں، 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 برچی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ کلیجہ سب مل کے جواب دیں چل گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ کتنا مشکل ہے یہ زینب کو بتانا اماں چل گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ اماں چل گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ کتنا مشکل ہے یہ زینب کو بتانا اماں چل گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ اماں چل گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ اماں چل گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ کتنا مشکل ہے یہ زینب کو بتانا اماں چل گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ اماں چل گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ آؤ تم ساتھ دو اس عالم غربت میں میرا تم بھی ایک ماں ہو سمجھ سکتی ہو غم زینب کا جب جنازے سے وہ لپٹے تو چھڑانا اماں چل گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ 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 اپنے اکبر سے جدا ہو کے نہ جی پائے گی ہائے اس حال میں دیکھے گی تو مر جائے گی میری ہمشیر کو مرنے سے بچانا اماں چل گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ کتنا مشکل ہے یہ زینب کو بتانا اماں چل گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ اماں گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ اماں گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ اماں چل گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ کتنا مشکل ہے یہ زینب کو بتانا اماں چل گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ اماں گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ اماں چل گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ اماں اس سے ملنے کے لیے بیٹھی ہے بیوار بہن اب کبھی لوٹ کے اکبر نہیں آئے گا وطن جا کے صغرا کو مدینے میں بتانا اماں چل گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ اماں چل گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ کلیجہ اماں چل گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ اماں چل گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ اماں چل گیا بھئی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ یا علی کہتے ہوئے میں نے سینہ کھینچی ہے جس کے لینے میں ابھی ٹوٹی سینہ باقی ہے زخم گہرا ہے وہاں اس کا چھپانا اماں اب چیز اکبر کا کلیجہ ماں چل گیا برچی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ ماں چل گیا برچی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ ماں چل گیا برچی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ صبر کیسے ہو میری جان میرے دل بھر نے ہاں میرے سامنے دم توڑ دیا اکبر نے موت ہے میرے لیے غم یہ اٹھانا اماں چل گیا برچی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ 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 کبھی گرتا تھا کبھی اٹھتا تھا میں چلتے ہوئے اس کے لاشے پہ میں آیا ہوں بڑی مشکل سے کاش اٹھاؤں تو میرا ساتھ نبھانا اماں چل گیا برچی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ اماں چل گیا برچی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ کلیجہ اماں چل گیا آخری شعر اکبر کا کلیجہ اماں چل گیا برچی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ یا علی کہتے ہوئے میں نے سینہ کھینچی ہے اس کے سینے میں ابھی ٹوٹی سینہ باقی ہے زخم گہرا ہے وہاں اس کا چھپانا اماں چل گیا برچی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ اماں برچی سے اکبر کا کلیجہ یا حسین یا حسین یا زبر دشتے نینوا میرے لشکر حسین زبر دشتے نینوا میرے لشکر حسین زبر دشتے نینوا میرے لشکر حسین زبردست نینوا میرے لشکر حسین اور نہنگ کلزم وغا امیر لشکر حسین اور خدنگ ترکش قضا امیر لشکر حسین اور برنگ شاہ لافتہ امیر لشکر حسین اور جری دلیر با وفا امیر لشکر حسین وفا بہاد معجزہ امیر لشکر حسین زبردست حسین کا حسین کا غلام بھی اور حسین کی سپر بھی ہے، تبر بھی ہے، حسام بھی اور حسین کی زرا بھی ہے، کما بھی ہے، سیام بھی اور حسین حکم دے اگر تو شمر سے کلام بھی، وگرنہ وہ کجا کجا میرے لشکر حسین زبردشت نینا، میرے لشکر زبردشت نینا، اور بہادران صف شکن، بہادران صف شکن میں اس جرے کے تذکرے اور دلاوران تیغ و زن میں اس جرے کے تذکرے اور ہر ایک وفا کی انجمن میں اس جرے کے تذکرے اور غرور پاک کے چمن میں اس جرے کے تذکرے، غرور آل مصطفیٰ میرے لشکر حسین زبردشت نینا، میرے لشکر زبردشت نینا، اور یزید بد نہاد سے سکون ذات چھین لے اور شعاع مہر کے لیے حق حیات چھین لے، اور جو مرضی حسین ہو ابھی فرات چھین لے، اور جو مرضی حسین ہو ابھی فرات چھین لے، اور فرات کیا ہے یہ وہ ہے کہ کائنات چھین لے، بڑا بلند حوصلہ میرے لشکر حسین زبردست، اور مگر یہاں تو حکم ہے، مگر یہاں تو حکم ہے کہ بس علی کے شیر بس، اور حسین اپنی زندگی سے ہو چکا ہے سیر بس، اور قریب وقت عصر ہے بس اب میرے دلیر بس، اور ہمارے کوچ میں کہیں مزید ہو نہ دیر بس، کرے گا تابق وغا میرے لشکر حسین زبردشت نینوا، میرے لشکر حسین زبردشت نینوا میرے، اور مگر یہاں تو حکم ہے کہ بس علی کے شیر بس، اور حسین اپنی زندگی سے ہو چکا ہے سیر بس، اور قریب وقت عصر ہے بس اب میرے دلیر بس اور ہمارے کوچ میں کہیں مزید ہو نہ دیر بس کرے گا تابقے وغا میرے لشکر حسین زبردشت نینوا میرے لشکر حسین زبردشت نینوا